also found out that in Babylon they had a trinity of sorts. And I found out that the Roman gods had their little trinity, and the Assyrians had a sort of a trinity of sorts, and the Incas and the Mayas, they all had little trinities of sorts, and the Celtics, they had their, well, that's the basketball team, but the other Celtics, they had a trinity source. And, they had the trinity, the three women, what is that, the crone, the witch, and the mother, they had theirs, the whole Halloween fest, and all these little solstice celebrations around Easter, they have all their trinities. That means there's no such thing as a real trinity? Is their Trinity the same as our Trinity? Is their triune God the same as our triune God? So just merely because the Greek philosophers had a cockatrice that could look upon you and then its look would kill you has nothing to do with what the Bible says about a cockatrice. So why would we define a cockatrice according to Greek mythology? Now, from what I understand, there are snakes that can spit at you and kill you. Spit get in your eye. They got those spitting cobras and they'll blind you. And from what I understand, their venom is so poisonous that it could kill you, possibly. But that's not what the Bible's talking about here, is it? The Bible says that their eggs are poisonous, and when they bite, they'll kill you. But there's such a thing called a cockatrice. And just because you've never seen a cockatrice and you don't know what a cockatrice looks like doesn't mean that there's no such thing as one. And what if there was a snake that could look at you and venom was so poisonous that it could kill you? Does that mean that there wouldn't be any such thing, that God couldn't make any such a thing? So in order to get over this calamity of not knowing what a cockatrice is and not wanting to be a slave to Greek mythology, we'll just invent a new snake. Or we'll just take a North American cobra and put it in there, or Indian cobra. Or we'll put a North American rattlesnake or the adder, and we'll just sit there. It's got to be something, but it can't be a cockatrice. Why? Because we don't know what a cockatrice is. Do you understand the problem with that kind of reasoning? Look what the Bible says about Behemoth. Job chapter 40. Let's go a little bit further. Job chapter 40 and verse 15. I don't want to read through all that stuff. He says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee. He eateth grass as an ox." Alright, so now what do we know about Behemoth so far? He eats grass like an ox. Alright, now, I heard some say, well, it's talking about an alligator. Well, alligators don't eat grass. Not that I'm aware of. Do they eat grass? Alligators eat grass? They're like a meat-eating thing, aren't they? Yeah. Alright, rotten meat besides. It says, "Which I made with thee, he eateth grass as an ox. Lo, his strength is in his loins, his force is in his navel of his belly." Unlike the unicorn, he says he made him with thee. Evidently, the behemoth is not as agitating, is not as cantankerous, is not as pushy, necessarily, as the unicorn. But it's the same God that says to the same Job that there was a unicorn, and he says, "Now behold Behemoth." He doesn't say, "Let me tell you about Behemoth." He doesn't say that thing. He doesn't say that about the unicorn. "Let me tell you about the unicorn." Evidently, the unicorn was something that Job was very familiar with. Unless, of course, there really isn't a Job. But isn't that another line that they'll use and say that Job is just an allegory? It's just a form of poetry to teach greater truths? Because of the ignorant masses that wouldn't be able to handle the reality of it all, God has created the Alice in Wonderland book and called it the Bible, so that we might be able to understand deeper truths until, of course, we're illuminated and don't need these allegorical parables anymore. Let's go a little further. He says, "Behold now Behemoth, he eateth grass as an ox, lo, his strength is in his loins, and his force is in the navel of his belly. He moveth his tail like a cedar, and his sinews of his stones are wrapped together." He says, he moveth his tail like a cedar. Now, does anybody know what a cedar is?
It's a tree.
It's a tree. Is it an itty-bitty, tiny little tree? It's a big tree. Now, you know it's a big tree because it's the whole Middle East thing that we're dealing with here. You know, like the cedars of Lebanon? The ones they built the ships of Tarshish with? The ones that the Philistines built their great ships with? You know, and the Palestinians and the Canaanites and all this, that, and the other. He says, he moveth his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his stones are wrapped together. His bones are as strong pieces of brass. His bones are like bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. He that made him can make his sword to... He that made him can make his sword to approach unto him. Surely the mountains bring him forth food, where all the beasts of field play. He lieth under the shady trees, in the covert of the reeds and fens. What does that mean? Is he a desert creature?
Swamp filler.
He's a swamp guy. Sort of like what you may have seen as a brontosaurus, per se. Or one of those brachiosaurus, or whatever those other big lizard things are that they tell you is a lizard. You don't even know if they're lizards or not, do you? Well, look what the Bible said. Now, you say, well, now I've seen something like that. Well, they didn't see anything like that when the Bible translators got to go. So Schofield writes in his book, the elephant as some think. Well, I don't know about you, but I've never seen an elephant with a big, hunky, cedar-looking tail. Have you? See, that's the problem when you try to tell God what He's trying to say. God's trying to tell you something. And He's not trying to tell you that the thing is here now. And He's not talking to you directly. He's talking to who? He's talking to Job. But these things are written for what? Our learning. All right, now look. The Bible says his bones are strong as pieces of brass. His bones are like the bars of iron. He is the chief of the ways of God. There's nothing... God never made a land animal bigger than him. Nobody pushes around. He's got no natural predators. And the only sword that can come against him is the same sword that made... The same God that made him would have to make the sword that came against him. That's all God's telling you. He's that big. And he's remotely friendly. He just kind of hangs out and eats grass. And look what the Bible says. He lieth under the shady trees in the covert of the reed and ferns. The shady trees cover him with their shadows. The willow of the brook compass him about. Behold, he drinketh up a river, and hasteneth not. He trusteth that he can draw up Jordan into his mouth. He taketh it with his eyes. His nose pierceth through snares. So, there's big creature. You don't believe in big creatures like that, do you? The Bible says there were giants in the land in those days. Oh, those giant people. No, it doesn't say giant people. It says there were giants in the land in those days. I think there's giant people, and there's also this thing. There's this thing. Anybody ever seen the Creation Institute stuff? The great big footprints? Anybody ever see the sides of these mud caves where they're talking about these giant creatures that men are hunting back and forth, and things are 25 and 30, 40 feet tall? Look at this one here. It says, he taketh with his nose pierceth through snares. Every once in a while, one of the neighbors would try to catch him. It just didn't work. You can set a snare for Behemoth. Or he's running through the bushes, he catches the snare, his nose pierces through it. And what's that little thing flapping in the wind? That's Bill. He tried to lasso the Behemoth yesterday. Now it's just running around the yard with him. Well, I don't believe in that sort of thing. It's right here. It's right here. Now, if that's not... And by the way, but it's only mentioned one time in the Bible. Right here. Job chapter 40, 15 through 24. Jay, there's no other reference for this in the Bible. I guess we can't believe it because there's only one spot in the Bible where it says that. How many ever heard that theological argument?
Yeah.
Well, there's only that. Listen, outside of them two places in the Bible, you can't prove whatever it is that you think you're trying to prove.
And your point is?
Huh? You can't just... Listen, outside... It's almost like saying outside of the witnesses you brought to the trial, you don't have much of a case. People say, about believing in Jesus Christ. You say, well, listen, the only book you have is the Bible. All right, what book do you have? That there ever was a Napoleon. What book do you have that there ever was a Beethoven? What book do you have that there ever was an Alexander the Great? What book do you have that there was ever a Ptolemy or a Genghis Khan? What book do you have that says any of these people ever existed? Oh, I have Hippolytus, and I have Josephus, and I have Aristotle, and you have all the Greek philosophers, and the Greek historians, and the Roman historians, and you can know all the different things. Listen, you know how many bodies of Roman emperors they've discovered? Anybody know? Anybody know? How many bodies of Roman emperors have they discovered? They've never discovered any bodies of any Roman emperor. They burned their dead. You can't prove that a Roman emperor ever existed. There's not one smidgen of evidence that Caesar Augustus ever walked the planet as far as physical evidence is concerned. You have statues of him, but hey, listen, you get 400 or 500 years, you can make statues of anything. Look at the Shroud of Turin. There is no evidence whatsoever that Caesar Augustus ever lived. They can't find his tomb. They can't find his grave. There's not a scrap of his body anywhere. And yet when they turn around and they say about Jesus Christ being a myth, they said, well, where's his grave? Where's his body? Where's his this? Where's his that? Well, we got John the Baptist. He's missing a head, granted. And we've got some of the other apostles' fingers, and they're all jammed into Catholic stones and stuff. It's the most ridiculous thing you ever want to find. But there's no evidence. Well, there's no evidence of anybody having been crucified. That's because they burned the bodies or fed them to dogs when they were done. Yet nobody argues that Pontius Pilate or Nero crucified all these people on the wall.